Belgium remains on high alert as the country mourns those killed in Tuesday's deadly attacks. U.S. President Barack Obama arrives in Argentina after an historic visit to Cuba. And using big data and the cloud to bring clean water to some of the most remote regions of the world. Africa 54 starts right now. Good evening, I'm Linord Moudou. This is Africa 54. Vincent McCoy is off today. A massive manhunt is underway in Belgium for one of the men believed to have been involved in the horrific attacks in Brussels on Tuesday. The bombings killed at least 31 people and wounded 271 others. A Belgian federal prosecutor has confirmed that two brothers, Khalid and Ibrahim El-Bakraoui, were the suicide bombers killed in the attacks. Meanwhile, mourners gathered in the city center to pay tribute to those lost in the massacre. VOA's Heather Murdoch has more.
It's an emotional day here in Brussels after a moment of silence to commemorate the victims of Tuesday's bombings. Many families here in Brussels are still searching for missing loved ones.
I don't have the words to express what I feel, but it's true that we have been used to seeing these attacks for a long time. But when it happens at home, you feel it in a stronger way. You feel more involved. It's the least we could do for the victims.
Like the Paris attacks in November, Islamic State militants claimed responsibility for the bombings, which came 4 days after Salah Abdul Salam, one of the men accused of the Paris attacks, was arrested in Brussels. Belgian prosecutor Frederick Van Loo said police found a will on a computer left behind by one of the bombers.
Dans une poubelle de la même rue,
in a bin in the same street, the investigators found a computer containing the will of Ibrahim El-Bakraoui, in which he says he was in a rush. I don't know what to do, hunted everywhere, no longer safe, and that if he waits around too long, he risked ending up in a cell next to him.
de terminer à côté de lui dans une cellule.
Much of the city remains on lockdown as authorities continue the search for a third suspected bomber. The airport will be closed at least through Thursday. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Brussels.
For the very latest on the investigation and manhunt, let's go to reporter Dave Keating, who joins us live via Skype from Brussels. Dave, welcome to the show. Now, two brothers have been identified as a suicide bomber. What else do we know?
Well, original reports had said the two brothers were both at the airport. Now we know one brother was on the metro and one brother was at the airport. They both blew themselves up, but there is a third suspect that was at the airport that is now on the run. It's believed his bomb did not explode, and so then he somehow left the airport. There were reports today that he had been apprehended, but those turned out not to be true, so he is still on the loose.
So set the scene for us as to what is happening right now in Brussels. How is security?
The city's still very quiet. I'd say most people chose not to go to work today. The metro was partially running, although with extreme security. Anyone entering a metro station had to have their bags searched, and the trains were kind of making sporadic stops. It wasn't really clear where they were going. So a lot of people just chose to stay home. And in fact, the metro will stop running at 7 p.m. So anyone that needs to use it by then. In general, the streets are very quiet. The government has kind of lifted the instruction telling everyone to stay home, but I think a lot of people are still deciding to stay home.
Now, there was a press conference earlier today with talks of perhaps a pan-European security. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so the French Prime Minister, Emmanuel Valls, came to visit Brussels. He came to look at the site of the attacks, and then he held a press conference alongside the Belgian Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And in that, it was interesting to note the kind of pan-European language used, that this was an attack on all of Europe, and the EU Commission President said that the EU needs to look into establishing a security union A lot of this is about EU jargon. There are other unions that exist in the EU. There's something called the Energy Union. So, it's not really clear what he meant by that. But it seems like there's an increasing determination to have better coordination between European states when it comes to intelligence, because there's a feeling here in Brussels at the EU institutions that the national governments are ignoring the tools that they have to share intelligence with one another. There's still not enough trust between the European states.
Clearly, this is not just one country's problem. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. And that was Dave Keating, who was joining us live via Skype from Brussels. Now, U.S. President Barack Obama is in Argentina on Wednesday for a 2-day visit to improve diplomatic relations and bolster trade ties. Before arriving in Buenos Aires, Mr. Obama spoke directly to the Cuban people Tuesday in a speech broadcast on national television in Cuba. Alberto Pimienta has the report.
15 months ago, an American president talking directly to the Cuban people would have been diplomatically impossible.
I have come here to bury the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas.
From Havana's Grand Theater, a Havana landmark, Obama called the U.S. and Cuba brothers who've been strange for many years. As President Raul Castro and other Cuban officials listened, Obama spoke about the importance of human rights.
I believe citizens should be free to speak their mind without fear, to organize and to criticize their government and to protest peacefully, and that the rule of law should not include arbitrary detentions of people who exercise those rights. And yes, I believe voters should be able to choose their governments in free and democratic elections.
Obama called again for the embargo to end.
As President of the United States, I've called on our Congress to lift the embargo. It is an outdated burden on the Cuban people. It's a burden on the Americans who want to work and do business or invest here in Cuba. It's time to lift the embargo.
On the day of his arrival Sunday, Cuban authorities broke up a pro-democracy protest and made arrests. After his speech Tuesday, Obama met with Cuban dissidents, including some detained Sunday, in what was one of the most sensitive points of his visit.
As I have said consistently, part of our policy with respect to engagement with Cuba is not simply me meeting with President Castro or government-to-government relations. Much of this is a matter of us being able to hear directly from the Cuban people.
Obama's last stop on his visit was at a baseball stadium to watch an exhibition game between the Tampa Bay Rays and Cuba's national team. This shared national pastime, as Obama called it, was a display of unity between the two nations. Alberto Pimienta for VOA News, Washington.
President Obama's trip to Cuba was closely watched by U.S. lawmakers on Capitol Hill. VOA's Michael Bowman reports reactions were decidedly mixed.
This normalization effort has been an abject failure for freedom and democracy on the island.
Condemnation of President Obama's trip to Cuba on the House floor.
The Castro regime has already stated that it will not change one bit after all of these concessions. The Cuban people deserve better.
Even trip supporters are troubled by crackdowns on Cuban dissidents, including on the day Obama arrived.
You're not going to be where you need to be if you don't allow contrary voices to be heard.
But Clyburn notes if engagement with Cuba has not brought about sudden change, neither did decades of isolation.
I very much support normalizing relations with Cuba, because what we've done for the last half century has not worked.
Another Democrat hopes for long-term positive change.
A little breathing room now for the Cuban people, and a little more hope that this new relationship with their friend, the United States of America, could really translate to a better economy, better lives, better jobs, and hopefully less oppression.
While Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro both called for ending the U.S. economic embargo of Cuba, Republicans who control Congress say no.
The president supports plans to end the embargo, yet ignores the fact that increased trade will not reach the Cuban people. It will benefit the Cuban military and intelligence agencies.
Analysts note Obama has loosened some aspects of the embargo.
Obama has put all these cracks in it, as you know, by taking a lot of executive actions that really kind of fill the embargo full of holes, because he's allowing a lot of licensing of commercial products and allowing much more expanded travel, and financial regulations have been loosened.
America's opening with Cuba is likely to be debated for years to come.
America under the Obama administration has forsaken those who suffer under Castro's oppression. That's a sad fact. And this will be President Obama's legacy.
The eyes of the world, I think, are even more now on President Castro and the Cuban people to sort of, really live up to the idea that we will have normal relations.
Whether the opening endures may depend on who is elected in November to succeed Obama. Michael Bowman, VOA News, the Capitol.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at Linord Moudou. Coming up, how a non-profit organization uses data to bring clean water to remote communities. Stay with us.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They tell you what people are talking about. So for an in-depth look at the stories trending high on social media, turn to #VOA. It's not your typical talk show. From politics to pop culture, #VOA brings in the people leading the conversation, engages the audience, and gets answers to your questions. #VOA. Smart talk for smart people.
It's time for our business report. Last week, Standard & Poor's downgraded Nigeria's credit rating, and just yesterday, Nigeria raised its interest rates. Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino joins us live from New York to tell us more. Jill?
Good morning, Linord. The rout in oil really has done a number on the Nigerian economy, and that was the basis for the downgrade by S&P, taking the credit rating to negative from stable. The agency's oil price assumptions for 2016 through 2019 is about $20 a barrel. It also reflects Nigeria's foreign exchange policy. However, S&P did say it believes that medium-term prospects could be assisted by an oil rebound as well as government reforms.
Jill, was the raise in interest rates a surprise?
Yeah, Nigeria raised rates by 1 percentage point, taking its benchmark interest rate to 12%. It was widely unexpected because the Central Bank of Nigeria lowered rates by 200 basis points in November to help support the economy, which has been hit due to the plunge in oil prices. However, inflation rose in February, exceeding 10% for the first time in 3 years. And since the Central Bank of Nigeria is trying to keep inflation and the Naira stable, it tightened policy.
What else can Nigeria do to try and stabilize its economy?
That's a good question. And analysts believe that the departure from monetary policy and taking rates higher could be a signal that the CNB may devalue the Naira, even though the government has repeatedly said it will not. In fact, following the rate hike announcement, the Naira moved 1% higher against the U.S. dollar. Devaluing the Naira would make Nigeria more competitive in global trade, but recall that the country is not an exporting nation, which is why President Buhari doesn't want to devalue. The goal is to become less dependent on crude oil and diversify across a broad spectrum of industries like agribusiness and technology to achieve economic growth.
Good reporting there, Jill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting live from New York. A non-profit organization is using big data and the cloud to bring clean water to some of the most remote regions of the world. VOA's Tina Train reports.
New York-based nonprofit Charity Water is one of the more well-known aid organizations on the scene. With 1.5 million followers on Twitter and Hollywood supporters like Will and Jada Pinkett Smith. Still, the overwhelming feedback from donors was one that most charities have likely had to face. How much of a difference did their donations make? For the answer, Charity Water executives turned to technology.
Charity Water has been, since the very beginning, an organization really focused on using technology and gathering a lot of data about our projects. So since day one, we've mapped every single project on Google Earth.
Donors can search the Google Maps widget on Charity Water's website to see exact locations and pictures of all the water projects that have been implemented across 4 continents, over 17,000 in all. For Charity Water's directors, technology has also helped shed light on the efficacy of their efforts.
We're sort of in the middle of a quantum leap forward in terms of all of the data that we're able to collect.
A large part of that data comes courtesy of sensors installed on the water sources.
What we're able to see, for example, through our sensors is, how much water a particular well pumped on the other side of the world.
For Charity Water, real-time data for a well as far away as Nepal can be instantly accessed online.
So this is a sort of mock-up of a well in Nepal, and the piped sensor will fit on the tap like that.
By analyzing the data over time, Charity Water officials can chart peak water usage times and even determine when a well might need repairs.
We are collecting census data on before and after conditions for the communities that we're helping across hundreds of households in the areas that we're working on. All of this is coming together and being aggregated into a much richer picture of what our work represents in the field. We've always known that we're doing good, and what this does is it tells us precisely how much good we're doing.
And based on the responses Charity Water has amassed, it's obvious their work has paid off. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
Now, combustion engines in cars may be on the way out, but experts agree it will take a few decades before electric-powered vehicles become dominant. A US-based company is using an old technological concept to build a powertrain that is 50% more fuel efficient and just as powerful as conventional engines, as VOA's George Potich reports.
This little engine looks like it has only 3 pistons, but in fact it has 6, sharing only 3 cylinders. With the help of modern technology, California-based Acates Power has given new life to the concept of the opposed piston engine, mostly abandoned after the Second World War.
With the opposed piston engine, you're able to achieve the efficiency of a much larger engine in a much smaller package.
An opposed piston engine is a 2-stroke engine with separate oil flow. It has no cylinder heads and no valves, both sources of considerable loss of heat and power in conventional combustion engines. 2 pistons move against each other in the cylinder, compressing a fuel-air mixture which self-ignites, pushing the pistons apart, generating power. Exhaust gases escape through ports in the cylinder walls. Stripped of many conventional engine parts, the opposed piston engine is inexpensive and simple to manufacture.
We make sure that we don't over-scavenge and achieve a very good combustion efficiency so that unburned hydrocarbons and emissions is reduced to a great extent.
Larger opposed piston engines have long been used for military and other applications, but developing them for consumer vehicles was not easy.
This combustion strategy has some difficulties and weaknesses at low loads because it needs a certain level of temperature inside the combustion chamber to make sure that the gasoline gets ignited.
Acates Power, together with Argonne National Laboratory and Delphi Automotive, say they are sure they will overcome the obstacles and by 2018 will have a 50% more effective 3-liter 3-cylinder engine that will be suitable for passenger cars and trucks. George Putich, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Music lovers in the United States are still enjoying the classic sound of the blues. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Niger, President Mahamadou Issoufou is re-elected to a second term with 92% in a controversial runoff vote. In Nigeria, the country's central bank unexpectedly raises its benchmark interest rate from 11 to 12% as economic crisis worsens. In the Republic of Congo, incumbent President Denis Sassou Nguesso holds a commanding lead in the presidential poll to extend his long rule. Finally, in Angola, a yellow fever outbreak kills at least 158 people and continues to spread, according to the World Health Organization. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They tell you what people are talking about. So for an in-depth look at the stories trending high on social media, turn to #VOA. It's not your typical talk show. From politics to pop culture, #VOA brings in the people leading the conversation, engages the audience, and gets answers to your questions. #VOA. Smart talk for smart people.
Music lovers and film lovers mingled last week in Austin, Texas, for the music and film programs staged at South by Southwest's 30th annual gathering. One of the films focused on the blues players still working in southern towns and rural areas where the distinctive American musical genre started more than 100 years ago. VOA's Greg Fleckes has more about the film I Am the Blues.
In rural back-road places in southern states like Mississippi, there are aging singers keeping the blues traditions alive.
I'll never drop down low. Have you ever been mistreated?
Even though he plays on stages all over the world, Bobby Rush is still part of this world.
Because I'm proud to be me, I'm proud to be a blues singer, I'm proud to be a black man who sings the blues.
Rush helped the film's director, Daniel Cross, find some of the longtime players whose voices may soon disappear as they grow old and die.
And that's why we went in the film to the originators, you know,
exactly.
the octogenarians actually that are still around playing the blues. And we just went and hung out with them while they were and tried to get them together so that they could share their stories.
The film's only female blues legend is Barbara Lynn from Beaumont, Texas, who sings her big hit from 1962. For now, Cross is mainly showing I Am the Blues at festivals like South by Southwest, inviting some of the subjects to the screenings.
So that they can see the film in a professional kind of environment, but with an adoring crowd that afterwards is going to show them the love they deserve.
The film has already played at festivals in Europe and will be shown at the Hot Docs Documentary Film Festival in Toronto in April. Greg Fleckes, VOA News, Austin, Texas.
Now, Eye in the Sky, a riveting thriller by award-winning filmmaker Gavin Hood, follows a joint American-British military drone operation about to strike a terrorist cell in Nairobi, Kenya. VOA's Pelenor Pulu has more on the dramatized account.
That's done for.
just changes things.
When military officials realize the terrorist cell, led by British-born Susan Helen Danford, is preparing for a potentially large-scale suicide attack in Nairobi, they contemplate upgrading their capture-only drone mission to a killing one.
We need to put a hellfire through that roof right now.
To the frustration of mission leader Colonel Catherine Powell, played by Helen Mirren, the military and political hierarchy is mulling over the strategic, political, and personal cost of such a decision. Meanwhile, time is running out.
We lost visual.
Christ.
The stakes get even higher when a child enters what would be the kill zone of a drone strike.
We've got 2 suicide bombers inside that house, and no one wants to take responsibility for pulling the trigger.
If they kill 80 people, we win the propaganda war. If we kill 1 child, they do.
Filmmaker Gavin Hood says Eye in the Sky shows there are no easy answers.
Will you sacrifice an innocent life? Will you definitely take an innocent life in order to possibly prevent the loss of 80 lives? Now, you can change that very quickly. What if there were 5 innocent lives close to this kill zone? What if the estimate of the loss of life was only 20? What if it was 2,000?
The decision makers in the dramatized operation are in different locations. While Colonel Powell is in a bunker at Northwood, London, Lieutenant General Frank Benson, played by the late Alan Rickman, is looking at the target from a boardroom elsewhere in London, and the drone pilots expected to pull the trigger are locked in a container-like structure in the U.S. state of Nevada, controlling the drone thousands of miles away.
They're not actually in touch as human beings. They're in touch through the veil of the computer screen. And that itself raises questions. Is it easier to pull a trigger when you're not facing your enemy?
Gavin Hood says the dilemmas in his film are based on real-life scenarios of drone warfare.
There are people within the military who are seriously questioning the use of the drone, and there are people within the military who think it's the best thing that's ever happened.
Given the new circumstances, I think we should abort.
You have number 4 and 5 on the president's kill list in your sights. You are putting the whole mission at risk because of one collateral damage issue?
He hopes his film will generate discussions among his audiences on the human, political, and strategic cost of drone warfare. Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 300 and 600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.